going to hear and read. I think with time, we are going to hear and read a lot more from Luke on environmental issues. Time for me to stop talking for a change and to hand it over to Luke. Luke, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tim. And thank you everybody for having me. And I'm excited to read about your organization. And yeah, I hope I can pass along something that it sounds, by just listening to the meeting, it sounds like I'm talking to people that could probably tell me a lot more about birds than I can tell you. But I hope that I can pass along something that's new, or I hope I can be at least entertaining, if nothing else. So thank you for having me. I was telling Tim earlier, I'm kind of a disgrace to millennials for how bad I am with technology, so you'll have to bear with me. The one thing I was going to ask is, I don't know if everyone can see my screen as like the full screen. I don't know if that's possible. I guess, is it Sarah? That is
Sarah would know.
Yeah, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with everybody, because there's some resources that I want to share so that everybody can see it. And instead of being a small little window, I'd like it if everyone could see the full thing. But is that possible?
Yes, it is. So what you do is you go to the bottom of your screen. In the middle, there's a green button that says share screen.
Yep.
If you click on that, multiple windows of your screen will pop up. You just click on which one you'd like to share, and then you hit share.
Okay, perfect. And that'll show like that'll show a full screen on your end.
That will show that particular tab. If you want to be like switching between like Google and like, I don't know, like PowerPoint or some kind of something like that, you're gonna just have to 1 second. You share. You just hit screen, the screen button instead of.
Okay, let's see here. Let me see if I can.
So yes, basically we will be able to see it. Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to see if I can bring up. Okay. Let me just see. I just want everybody to be able to see the resources I have here, because it'll make it a lot more interesting than just seeing my face. Okay, let's see. Okay, now let's see if I can share my screen here. All right, let's see if I do this. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yes.
Good. Okay, I'm gonna move that around. Okay, so this is, I don't know who has I know Tim obviously has seen the article. This is the article that came out in Ontario Nature last spring. And it's what got Tim's attention. So I thought I would just share, because I don't know who has been able to see the this edition of Ontario Nature. So I thought I would share it and kind of just show you some of the images from it, because I thought some of the images were great. Some good close-ups and of the shrike and of the Cardin Alvar habitat. So I think I'm going to start off by just kind of explaining how I came to be interested in the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike and the work that the work that's being done to save the species. And I'm just going to scroll down here. So I found, I think it's at the bottom of the article, I came across a report that was published that talked about how North American bird populations have plummeted by 29% since 1970. And what I'm going to do is, I think I actually have that to show you. Let's see here. Okay, I'm going to have to share my desktop here. Okay. Okay. So this was from this is a publication that was done in 2019. And what this chart is showing here is how bird populations have declined in North America since 1970. So the chart here you can see on the side, it's changed. This is billions of birds, and this is 1970 to 2000. I think it was 2015 is when the data was collected until. And what was most interesting to me was if you look at grassland species, especially have taken the biggest hit. So I put a few emails in just kind of after I read this because it was really concerning to me. I put a few calls in and some emails into a few different organizations, and Lance Wolliver from Wildlife Preservation Canada got back to me and told me about the work that they're doing to save the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike. So since 1970 to 2015, there's been a loss of I think it's 3 billion birds or something like that, which is obviously very substantial and very alarming. So I asked him to tell me a little bit more about the species, and he started talking about the Alvar, and I really wanted to go see it for myself, what the work they were doing was and the habitat. So he invited me to go watch a release that was being done for some of the fledglings that they had that year. Now, it was the first year of COVID. It was 2020. So it was kind of a bit of a rough year for them because a lot of their captive bred fledglings that they were going to release, they couldn't get because a lot of them were bred in the States, and they weren't transferring them to Carden to be released. So they kept them in captivity to be used as breeding pairs, which was good for the breeding program, but not great for the population in the wild. I'm going to go back to the article, and yeah, I think so. At the time that this article was published last year, where are we here? I think there was less than 50 individuals left in the wild, and they had been having a lot of success year after year. You can see right here in this part of the article, it talks about how, let's see, where are we here?
Stop.
It says, in years past, many of these would have been filled with fledglings. So I was talking about the enclosures they have on the site where they release the fledglings, and they would normally be full of young shrikes, but they were almost all empty. So in 2019, the program released 65 young shrikes into the wild. The year before that, the number was over 100. And the year I was there were only 7 birds inside a single enclosure. So it's kind of interesting how COVID-19 affected their program. That being said, the majority of wild Eastern Loggerhead Shrikes now have come from the breeding program. And regardless of that year individually, they are showing a steady increase in how many they're able to release into the wild. And they are seeing returning birds coming back every year because it's a migratory species. They're seeing them return to the Cardin Alvar, and they're having a lot of success with the program. It's one of the most successful rehabilitation programs in the world for migratory species. So it's very exciting for them, and they're having a lot of success. So it's very hopeful. I'm gonna stop sharing that. Okay. So the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike, the butcher of the Alvar. I'm just going to assume, I know a lot of you probably are already familiar with the species, you know a lot about it, but I'm just going to assume that you don't know much about it and introduce it as though you don't. And then I'm more than happy, I'm going to have time to take questions. So if you have any questions about their characteristics, I'd be more than happy to answer what I can. It's a small songbird, the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike. What makes it unique is that it's a predatory songbird, and for its small size, it packs a pretty big punch. It hunts prey up to 1.5 times its size, including rodents, small salamanders. It hunts a lot of insects, but it'll also hunt smaller birds as well. And it has a hooked beak like a raptor. But what's interesting about the hooked beak on the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike, and I'm going to actually share my screen again and show you an image so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, go here, scroll up. So the hooked beak, what's interesting about the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike is it actually evolved to have the hooked beak separate from most of the raptor species. So it's the lead biologist of the program, Hazel Wheeler, she explained it to me that when you trace back the evolution of this species, that hooked beak was evolved separately from how a lot of raptor species evolved their hooked or toothed beaks. And in this case, part of why it evolved its hooked beak was because of its small stature. It has to kind of tear its prey apart, and it does this by using its toothed beak or its hooked beak. But it also does, and this is why it's got its nickname, the butcher bird. It actually impales its prey on thorns and any sort of spikes that it can find. Very commonly, it uses barbed wire to impale its prey. And then because it doesn't have the talons that a lot of the larger predator birds have, it has kind of small, delicate feet. So it relies on impaling its prey on barbed wire and using its toothed beak to kind of tear it apart. So it's earned the nickname the butcher bird, and that's hence the title of the article. So it's what I liked about the species and why I was so interested in it is because it's a great example of the diversity within species within Canada, not just visually, but also in their characteristics. That you have this small little predatory songbird, and it's the small ferocious bird that has these ruthless kind of characteristics. I thought it was just really interesting to kind of just see. It's just a great example of the diversity that exists within Canada, and what ended up being a fascination in the diversity of the species. What I ended up learning about was how it's diversity like this within the ecosystem that makes it more resilient to things like changing climate into the future. Hazel, the lead biologist of the program, she explained to me, and I think I mentioned at the bottom of the article here, where she says a more diverse ecosystem is a more resilient ecosystem, which will be all the more important as we face climate change in more tangible ways. And I don't know, I'm sure some of you are familiar with the threat of biodiversity loss, and the reason why it's so important to save individual species like the endangered Eastern Loggerhead Shrike is we want to maintain as much biodiversity as possible, and that's to protect our ecosystems and our environment from a changing climate. So it's species like this that kind of become a poster child for conservation. It's species that have these unique characteristics that make people interested in them, want to see them, want to save them, and hopefully the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike, it will become, a species like that, where people will care for the fact that they're so endangered and want to take steps to help save the species in any way they can. I think I'm going to move on now to actually what I'll do is I'm going to bring up another picture of a shrike, and I'll just kind of explain its physical characteristics, and then I can move on to what is threatening the species. Let's see if I have yeah. Actually, I'm going to save that image. Let's see here. Okay. Can everyone see the image of the shrike here impaling a rodent? Can everyone see that or no?
Yes, yeah, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so there's two subspecies. There's the prairie subspecies that occurs in Saskatchewan and Alberta, and then there's obviously the eastern subspecies in Ontario and Quebec. There's also the northern shrike as well, which is, there's two predatory songbirds in Canada, as far as I'm concerned, what I learned through the studying this. And it's the northern shrike and then the loggerhead shrike, both the eastern subspecies and the prairie subspecies. They're migratory bird, like I mentioned, and their range overlaps in Manitoba. And they go as far south. I think the furthest south they've been found is North Carolina. So they migrate very far, which is pretty exciting, actually. I think behind this image here, it talks about it. So they found a bird in 2015. So it was Virginia. So color banded a female shrike in Virginia in May. The bird was part of a breeding pair. Easily turned up at a release site in Napanee in August. A mid-season trip north of more than 900 kilometers. So Hazel Wheeler, the lead biologist, says she doesn't know why the bird made the move, but it's an example of the kind of surprise information that they've gotten from the work that they're doing with partners across the border, south of the border. So the migratory bird, so it says, I have kind of a description here talking about the differences. It says, as a large head on a small body, that's where the name comes from, loggerhead, large head. And it's, like I said, it's similar to its cousin, the northern shrike. But the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike has a raccoon-like eye mask, gray back of its head with black wings, white underparts, and a small hook at the end of its bill, like I explained before. Both possess similar traits. The Loggerhead Shrike is distinguished by its wider eye mask, so it kind of goes back further on its head than the northern shrike. It covers its entire eye and its bill, and then it has a completely white underside with no markings. Excuse me. So that's how you can distinguish it between the loggerhead and the northern shrike. They winter in southern United States. Each spring they return to Canada to breed in the grasslands of southern Ontario, also in Quebec, and like I said, Manitoba. They use trees with thorns, including hawthorns, to rear their young. And like I said, they use it to impale their prey. This is why the Alvar habitat is such a great habitat for shrikes, because the low grass and the high perches allow for excellent hunting grounds for them, and then the type of bushes and the characteristics of the Alvar allow for things like hawthorn and places where they can do their thing. So like I said, it in the article, I kind of go into more description about how it uses its big head to kill its prey. It can actually it uses like a dog-like whipping motion to break the neck of its prey, and it can actually it'll crack its prey's skull. It's a pretty powerful little bird. Goes for very small mammals, rodents, insects, and like I said, other birds. And like I said, it impales its prey to eat it. Now the barbed wire, I've mentioned barbed wire a couple times. The reason why it uses barbed wire is because Eastern Loggerhead Shrikes, they really like land that's been grazed. So cattle ranches have traditionally been excellent habitat for Eastern Loggerhead Shrikes. Alvar habitat naturally is just like that. And the reason Alvar habitat is the way it is because of the limestone basin underneath. It allows for this kind of short grassland to form, and some bushes will grow in this habitat, but it kind of it allows for this low grassland with a few high perches, like I mentioned, but also cattle ranches have traditionally been adopted by Eastern Loggerhead Shrikes for as long as we know. Eastern Loggerhead Shrikes have been using cattle ranches as hunting grounds, especially along migratory routes. And this kind of brings me into what's threatening the species. One of those things is, as we move away from traditional cattle grazing and ranches, and we rely more on factory farming for meat instead of ranches, and then we use the land more for growing large swaths of monocrops. The large swaths of monocrop land it's not good for the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike, and it's mainly because they need perches, and those huge swaths of farmland oftentimes have no perches, so they can't use them for hunting properly or nesting. And it used to be that there were enough cattle ranches that they'd be able to establish routes south to migrate properly. But the more land that's used for growing crop, and the less these cattle ranches, or the more these cattle ranches disappear, the harder it is for these shrikes to migrate south. What I'm going to do real quick is pull up a picture of the some Alvar habitat pictures. I think this is a good example. Let's see if I can make this bigger. Not really. You can see how there's it's a lot of flat grassland where small animals, small mammals can live, but then there's these odd trees and bushes where shrikes can perch. So it makes for excellent hunting habitat. I'm just going to see if I can. I think I have a picture of. Okay, well, this was taken at the field site. You can kind of see in the background there's an enclosure. That's one of the enclosures from the release site, and there's a shrike kind of in the middle of the screen there, perched on that dead wood. So you can see kind of some of the bushes.
I'm not seeing that picture.
Sorry, say that again.
I'm not
Luke.
seeing that picture.
Oh, you're not seeing the picture.
No.
Yeah,
Okay,
you just
hang on.
got to reshare with that particular picture.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see. Let's see here. Huh, I wonder why that is. Oh, I think I know why. Hang on. Let me try something different. I want you to be able to see it. Let's see here. Share screen. Desktop. Let's see if this works. Can you see that?
No.
Here we
Yes,
are.
now we can.
Now
Thank
you can. Okay, good. Yeah, so this was taken at the field site where I visited for the release. So in the background there, it's kind of blurred out. You can see one of the enclosures. And in the middle of the screen here, you can see a shrike perched. And you can kind of see in the background all these shrubs, and then the low-lying grass. And there's a shrub here in the foreground. So this is what creates the great hunting grounds for the species. The rodents live in the grass, and insects obviously, and then they perch in these shrubs, and then a lot of these shrubs will have thorns that they can impale their prey on. So this right here is actually the release site is actually on a cattle ranch, and it's currently used to raise cattle. So because of the grazing that's done on this land, it kind of keeps the land exactly optimal for shrikes. And like I said, there used to be a lot of cattle ranches across North America, and that's where the shrikes would carve out these migratory routes. And as this land gets eaten away, because it gets shifted to growing crops, or it gets developed for any number of reasons, there's just less and less habitat along the migratory routes for these shrikes to survive while they migrate. So this is just an example of kind of what the habitat looks like. When I first got there to the Carden area, in the article, I kind of describe it as it felt like I was in a frontier flick. Just these like vast, sprawling, kind of unmanicured fields. It's just something you would have seen out of like I said, like a frontier flick. It was it was really cool. It kind of felt, yeah, it just felt like I was in like a Western movie or something like that. But this is another example of how you have these vast areas of tall grass, but then you have these shrubs and the odd tree where they can perch and hunt. So the barbed wire. Because cattle ranches are typically fenced in, they're fenced in with barbed wire. The barbed wire actually works perfectly for shrikes to impale their prey. So it's just kind of one of those things where for a very long time, these cattle ranches were spread across North America, and a lot of them were run in very similar ways. And the shrikes just kind of adopted these ranches because it so closely mimicked their habitat. And these ranches they're just going away, you know. So when I asked the biologist there, you know, well, what can the average person do to help the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike population survive and thrive? One of the main things they told me was eat grass-fed Ontario beef. Because these ranches that raise grass-fed beef and free-range grass-fed beef, they are habitat. They're preserving habitat that's optimal and ideal for the Eastern Loggerhead Shrikes. So that's so one thing you can take from this talk is if you want to do something for the Eastern Loggerhead Shrikes, it's you know, find yourself a nice grass-fed Ontario raised steak to have for dinner. All right, I'm gonna go back to the article if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. Okay. All right. I'm gonna just talk a little bit more about some of the threats to the species, and then I'll just talk a little bit about the work that the Wildlife Preservation Canada is doing, and then I can open it up for questions. Okay, there's a couple other things that are affecting the species and why the shrike specifically is being affected. Like I mentioned, the loss of habitat due mainly in part to the loss of cattle ranching across North America. But there's also other factors. They're very susceptible to inclement weather. They're a tough bird, but what's happening, what they've noticed is as storms seem to be getting stronger, they're seeing a lot of lost nests, more than has been reported in the past. So I actually am right here in the article. And there's a decrease in wild hawthorn. Like I mentioned, the hawthorn is important as well because they use it for impaling their prey. And they nest on the hawthorn as well. But they're vulnerable to erratic extreme weather. So like I said, the nest failures, this is something that they've seen a lot of. And now that they've seen more of it and they realize that it's due to weather, they've started monitoring just how much the weather has been changing and how it's affecting nest failure. So whether or not that be because of the changing climate as a whole, or it just happens to be that the last couple of decades have been particularly tough for the species, it's definitely not helping anything. So they're seeing a lot more nest failures than they used to. And they're also, for some reason, they're also very susceptible to diseases, particularly West Nile virus. And the biologists explain that as the climate kind of warms and changes, they think that diseases like West Nile will become more abundant. So this also creates a problem for a species that is, like I said, susceptible to disease. And there's also a problem with some of the habitat too being lost to things like gravel pits. This is specifically in regards to the Cardin area. There's a lot of work that's being done to push back against gravel pits because Alvar habitat is on limestone basin, like I mentioned before. So this makes it ideal for stuff like gravel pits, obviously. But the Alvar habitat is, it looks like it's kind of bare and it looks like there's not much going on there, but it's actually extremely biodiverse. Not just species like the loggerhead shrike, but also the flora as well. And this is something that I'm probably going to do a follow-up. I'm hoping to do a follow-up article about the Alvar. There is a very rare type of lichen that that exists on the Alvar, and it's something I haven't done much research into, but I talked to a biologist working specifically on that, and it's something that I might follow up with as well. But it's a very biodiverse area, and there's a lot of reason why we should protect it. It's one of the largest Alvar habitats in the world, and it's one of the most accessible because it's so close to major population areas. Like it's from Kitchener-Waterloo, it took me 2.5 or 3 hours to drive there. And now there's in 2014, there's now a provincial park that you can visit as well, which is great. But yeah, it's very biodiverse. It's important to protect, but it's also sort of sought after by other interests, and there's been a lot of pushback against that. I think those are the main threats that are affecting the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike. And like I said, at the time of writing this article, there was less than 50 individuals. I'm hoping that this year, they haven't told me yet how many fledglings they're going to release this year. I'm hoping to find out soon. And hopefully it's going to be a lot more. Because like I said, in the year, the first year during COVID, it was especially bad because when they were wanting to move the fledglings, COVID was very early on, and people were being very, very, very cautious, and so they weren't transporting the animals across the border. And like I said, but those animals ended up they stayed in captivity to breed more. So it should have helped the breeding population, which should in turn last year and this year start really increasing the number of shrikes they can release into the wild. The program, like I said, it's one of the most successful rehabilitation programs for migratory bird species in the world, actually. And I have a quote here from Lance Wolliver, here, I'm going to turn off my screen share. Lance Wolliver from WPC. And I'll just kind of read it because he does a good job kind of explaining. He's very proud in the work they're doing. And I think he does a very good job kind of summing it up. He says, "Not only is the work we are doing keeping this charismatic songbird from disappearing from Canada, the techniques we have developed have a much wider application for endangered species conservation on a global scale. The Eastern Loggerhead Shrike Conservation Program is the only one of its kind and scope in the world for recovering a migratory songbird. Without the work we have done and are doing, Eastern loggerheads would most certainly no longer be found in Canada. There are other programs that work with migratory birds, the wall-drop ibis, the whooping crane, even burrowing owls here in Canada. But these are all larger species with different challenges and different survival rates during their first year of migration. The techniques are different for a smaller bodied songbird. Some of the methods we have developed for shrikes have already been modified for a number of other songbird species, the mangrove finch in the Galapagos, the lesser gray shrike in Spain, and the aquatic warbler in Lithuania. All of our conservation programs have this element where the techniques we develop for restoring a species have much wider applicability for other programs around the world. We love each of the species we work with, and at the same time, we take pride in leading in this way on a larger scale. So it's a bit of Canadian pride that we're making an impact on a global scale for conservation for endangered species. That Wildlife Preservation Canada is. And a big part of what WPC is advocating for is the protection of the habitat as well. He says, all of Wildlife Preservation's Canada conservation programs are similar in that we are not just saving the individual species. The conservation programs lead to habitat protection. Successful species-focused conservation projects have this effect. They're a catalyst for habitat protection and restoration. And this is part where the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike and the work that's being done to save the species is, like I said, in turn, hopefully going to save the Alvar habitat as well. And then there's one more thing I just want to share real quick. Let's see here. I think it's... So this was done by the Government of Canada, Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. So this is 2014. I don't think they've done another one since 2014. You can see there was one done in 2004, and then it wasn't done again until 2014. So I don't think they've done another one since. But if I scroll to page 10, let's see here. So this out of their report, so it says, this is for, I should show you, this is for the Loggerhead Shrike Eastern subspecies. So it says, probability of extinction in the wild is at least 20% within 20 years or 5 generations, or 10% within 100 years. It says the model predicted an estimate time to extinction of 43 years. I mean, this was 2014, and you can see in Ontario, mature individuals 50 to 100. So from 2014 to 2020, it declined by, about half. But according to Hazel Wheeler, she said it had it not been for the work of WPC, the number would have been 0. So it looks like the work they're doing, the numbers are still declining, but it's declining, but they're also doing work to save it. And like I said, if it's still in the 50 range. And I think the breeding bird atlas is being done currently too. So between that and the work that WPC is doing, I'm sure we're going to get a more accurate number. But heading up in for the WPC, the number would be 0. They would be gone. The subspecies would be gone. So hopefully, moving into the future, the more that people know about it, and the more we can advocate for the species and for the habitat, they won't disappear, and we can keep that unique subspecies in our province. I think that's it. I mean, there's more I could talk about, but I think it'd be awesome to open it up for questions. Is that okay with you, Tim?
Yep, perfect.
Great.
Do we have any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Historical numbers of the Eastern Shrike. What do you have any data on that at all?
So
I'm talking about a few hundred years, probably, pre-settlement. In other words, when the Southern Ontario, for instance, got opened up with farmland and so on and so forth, it sounds like it might have created some pretty good initial habitat. But what was it like before that, when it was largely forested?
Yeah, so I asked the same question to the biologists from WPC. There's very limited data as far as what the population was like historically. But you're right in assuming that with the introduction of like ranches and these farms that were grazing cattle, that it would allow for an increase in the population. But I mean, there were grazing and migrating animals, large, fauna in our province, actually, long before European settlers were here. And that's one thing that caught my ear too when I was talking to the biologists. I hadn't realized, but there were actually there were large migrations in Ontario before European settlers came. Now I'm kind of out of my scope here, but from what Alyssa Samuelson, one of the biologists with WPC, what she told me was that there was actually a species of buffalo in Ontario before European settlers came. And those big migrations of animals would have done the work of creating the habitat for the Eastern Loggerhead Shrikes before the ranches were established. So,
Right. So I just got one more comment. And you talk about the importance of cattle ranching, and you said it was very important because of the barbed wire for the prey and all that. And I was wondering, the cattle, just as you've just mentioned, would carry a lot of insects and things like that. And I was just wondering, what was the proportion of their diet be in terms of like the small rodents vis-a-vis insects and things like that, that you would think that the cattle would go for, and also the loss of hedgerows as well, and that seemed to be an ideal habitat for them as well. So that in Southern Ontario, we see a lot of loss of hedgerows too. So yeah.
It's primarily their diet is insects. They will hunt larger prey, but primarily it is insects. Yeah. To your point about the barbed wire, I think it's just one of those things that it was a very convenient, relationship that was completely unintentional. But a lot of these ranch owners, even before they knew about Eastern Loggerhead Shrikes, and what they were and what they did and why they did it, noticed the prey on their barbed wire. There's a lot of anecdotes about farmers being very curious why there's rodents hanging from their fences. And a lot of these ranch owners, they think it's great, and they're actually extremely open and willing to, especially to WPC, to let them, carry out work on their ranch. Like I said, the field site is on an active ranch. So when we were there, toward the end, later in the afternoon, we could hear the bells of the cows coming closer, which was kind of cool. But it's just one of those happy coincidences that just it benefited. It supplanted the habitat that was lost to development from early settlers, because they were raising cattle. So as much as we developed the land for residential and we started building cities, we were also establishing these ranches which protected their habitat unintentionally. So
thank you.
Any more questions?
I think one of the problems that the Cardin Alvar has, the very basis of the vegetation is aggregate. So there's been this great problem between cutting up all the Alvar for aggregate and saving it. And the initial problem with the farming people was that they thought they would get more from the aggregate producers than they would from the naturalists. But in actual fact, as you mentioned, that park being developed and a lot of land has been bought privately there as well. And they were actually paying above market price to get to be able to save that land. But that aggregate problem has not been quite sorted out. And I think it was a factor.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You're exactly right. Yeah. And it is very contentious. And like you said, especially now with the cost of the land as well. It is a hot topic in that area. And there's a number of organizations doing a lot of work to educate the public so that they understand, what kind of land they're living on and the importance for this habitat.
Yeah.
But it is a very contentious topic there. And there's a lot of different interests coming into play. And I mean, we're kind of seeing the same issues play out. Well, at least especially across this province, where for a lot of reasons we want to expand development, especially when it comes to like things like housing. We want to use land, to build and to develop. And then there's the other side of it pushing back, saying, well, we have to be careful with what and where. But yeah, especially in areas where you have very sensitive habitat like the Alvar, this becomes especially, like I said, contentious. So, but it's a beautiful habitat, and I'm so happy that they created the provincial park, and like I said, it just kind of takes you into a different world. I mean, like I said in the article, you're kind of driving past a lot of farmland and through these small towns, very typical of Southern Ontario. And then all of a sudden you turn a road and you drive a few kilometers down and you look around, and it, like I said, it feels like you're just in the frontier. It's quite remarkable. So, yeah.
There's even a lot of prairie smoke, which makes it feel very Western, doesn't it?
Yes.
And
yeah.
that's one of the most beautiful plants there, and usually really fairly early in the spring. It just looks like a purple cloud over the whole land.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It is beautiful.
Any other questions or remarks or anything else? If not, then I will thank you, Luke, very, very much.
Of course.
Fascinating. Really enjoyed it. It was good.
Thank you for having me.
Frank.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks, Luke. Certainly an interesting topic, and I think a lot of our members are familiar with the Cardin Alvar and driving through. And you're absolutely right. It's a wonderful place. I've always loved it. When I was younger, I probably would have driven through it and said, "Geez, there's nothing here," and but I don't look at it that way today, thankfully. Okay, so that moves us on to nearing the end of this meeting. So in closing, I want to thank our new board for 2022 and thank the members for supporting us. And at this time, I also wish to thank Mikey Bergnonakis and Michael Bigger, who are stepping down from the board today. They've served the WBFN admirably for many years, as a lot of you know. Mikey as secretary and Michael as past president, and most recently, a valuable member of the board. Thank you very much indeed.
You're here.
Yes, and also thank you to Sarah Inglis for setting up our Zoom call. Our next meeting will be March 25th at 7:30 p.m. and the guest speaker will be Kyle Blaney, and the topic will be trips in the Arctic.
Something different.
Just coming out of the winter, I think that I don't know what to say about that, Tim. But anyways, it'll be interesting. And
We'll probably have a snowstorm that night.
well, we probably will. And so thank you all and good night. And the time of adjournment is
8:50. 8:50.
Yeah, is it 8:50? Yeah, okay. Time of adjournment is 8:50, and wish you all a good weekend, happy weekend, and get out there and enjoy our nature. Good night.